If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. Your support helps us bring you even more incredible real-life stories that leave you thinking long after the video ends. Now let's dive into today's story. The champagne was vintage, the linens were crisp white, and the lie was $99,000 and $39,000 deep. My parents stood on the deck, fireworks exploding behind them, announcing the ultimate wedding gift, the family lake house for my sister Charlotte. The crowd cheered for their generosity. I didn't cheer. I checked my phone. The notification I set months ago glowed in the dark. Balloon payment due $99,000 and $39,000 in exactly 30 days. They weren't giving her a legacy. They were handing her a grenade. Before we go any further, drop a comment below. Where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? I love seeing how far this community reaches. I walked away from the applause, the sound of champagne corks popping, fading as I stepped onto the wooden planks of the dock. The air down here was heavy, smelling of lake water and algae, a sharp contrast to the expensive perfume wafting from the deck above. I needed the dark. I needed the silence because up there under the string lights, my family was performing their greatest hit, The Generous Dynasty. But down here in the glow of my phone screen, I was looking at the balance sheet, and the balance sheet was bleeding red. I've always been the invisible ledger in this family, the checkbook daughter. While Charlotte was the face, the influencer, the beauty queen, the one who brought home trophies, I was the one who brought home bail money when Charlotte totaled her first car at 19. I was the one who wired the deductibles, so Dad's insurance premiums wouldn't spike. When Mom had her medical emergency last year, which was actually a 5-figure bill from a cosmetic surgeon she tried to hide from Dad, I covered it. I had convinced myself it was loyalty. I told myself I was the responsible one, the pillar. But looking at the foreclosure notice PDF on my screen, Charlotte, I hadn't been a pillar. I had been a silent investor in a failing enterprise. My parents weren't rich. They were leveraged. They lived on a carousel of credit cards, second mortgages, and appearances. The vintage champagne they were drinking right now, probably charged to a card that was maxed out yesterday. And this house, this sprawling, beautiful lake estate that had been in the family for 3 generations, wasn't an asset anymore. It was a liability, a sinking ship, and they weren't gifting it to Charlotte out of love. They were transferring the captain's hat to her. Just before the water hit the bridge, I looked back up at the house. Charlotte was laughing, twirling in her white dress, holding a sparkler. She looked radiant. She also looked helpless, and for the first time I didn't feel jealous of her. I felt a cold, clinical pity. This was the cage of favoritism. They had spent her entire life protecting her from reality, handing her everything she wanted, and in doing so they had crippled her. She had no survival instincts. She didn't know how to read a contract, how to spot a scam, or how to survive a winter without a safety net. She thought she was the golden child, but she was just the sacrificial lamb. She had been fattened up on praise so she wouldn't notice the knife. I remembered a conversation with my mother years ago after I'd caught her lying to a neighbor about why we sold our second car. She had looked me dead in the eye and said, "Haley, we do what we must to protect the family name. The truth is only useful if it serves us." That was their logic. That was the trap of their good intentions. They genuinely believed that by hiding the debt they were protecting us, but you can't protect someone by handing them an anchor and telling them it's a life vest. The math was simple, brutal, and undeniable. If Charlotte signed that deed tomorrow, the debt became hers. The lawsuit settlement my father was hiding, the $93,000 wrapped inside that mortgage, would become her burden. They were saving their own credit rating by destroying hers. It wasn't a wedding gift, it was a financial death sentence. And I was the only one on the property who knew how to read the warrant. The next morning, the kitchen smelled of expensive espresso and denial. My parents were sitting at the Marble Island reviewing the guest list for the wedding, as if they hadn't just announced a fraudulent property transfer to 180 people the night before. I walked in not with coffee, but with the foreclosure notice pulled up on my tablet. I didn't scream. I audited. The balloon payment is due in 29 days. I said, placing the screen on the cool stone between them, $99,000 and $54,000. If Charlotte signs that deed, she inherits the debt. You aren't giving her a house. You're giving her a bankruptcy. My father George didn't even look at the screen. He took a sip of his coffee, his expression one of bored disappointment. "Always the accountant, aren't you? Hi Lele, we're having a moment of family joy, and here you are audit in hand, trying to balance the books of happiness. It's not happiness, Dad. It's math, and the math says you're insolvent. My mother Lisa chimed in, her voice tight and sugary. We have a business deal closing next month that will cover everything. You know how these things work. Haley, liquidity is fluid. We're doing this for Charlotte's future. Why can't you just be happy that your sister is getting her legacy, because a legacy shouldn't require a credit check? I countered, you're using her credit score to patch the hole in yours. You're jealous, George snapped the mask, slipping just an inch. You've always been jealous of her. You worked hard, sure, but Charlotte, she shines and you can't stand that we're giving her the stage. Before I could respond, Charlotte walked in. She was wearing a white silk robe, looking every inch the princess they had raised her to be. She didn't look at the tablet. She looked at me and her eyes were cold. Are you still doing this? She asked, her voice dripping with pity. Oliver told me you were lurking on the dock last night looking miserable. Now you're harassing Mom and Dad. God, Haley, you're so corporate. You think everything is a transaction. You can't just accept that. Some people get good things because they're loved. I looked at her and the anger in my chest cooled into something forensic. This was the cage of favoritism. My parents hadn't just spoiled her. They had disabled her by handing her everything she ever wanted without struggle. They had removed her survival instincts. She was a show pony, groomed, beautiful, and trained to trot in circles while the barn burned down around her. She didn't question them because she had never needed to. Her privilege was a muzzle. It kept her docile, compliant, and completely blind to the fact that the people feeding her sugar were also sharpening the knife. She wasn't an accomplice. She was the perfect victim. I'm not jealous, Charlotte, I said, picking up my tablet. I'm terrified for you. Save it. She spat. I don't need your protection. I have Dad. I looked at George. He smiled, a thin, triumphant curling of his lips. He thought he had one. He thought that by turning the golden child against the scapegoat he had secured his cover, but he had made a miscalculation. He thought I was still playing by family rules where emotions mattered. He didn't. Charlotte, I had just switched to professional rules, and in my profession emotions are irrelevant. Only evidence counts. I didn't say another word. I turned around, walked out of the kitchen, and packed my bags. I was done being a sister. It was time to become an analyst. I drove back to the city in silence, the hum of the tires on the highway, the only sound replacing the accusations, echoing in my head. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I switched gears, the emotional part of my brain, the daughter who wanted her father's approval, the sister who wanted to be included, shut down in its place. The forensic analyst woke up. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was a case file, and I knew exactly how to build it. Back in my apartment, I set up my war room, 3 monitors, a fresh pot of coffee, and access to the public databases I use for work. I started pulling the threads my father thought he had buried. I pulled the property records for the lake house first. The deed history showed the transfer to my parents 19 years ago. Clear and clean. Then came the first mortgage standard. But then 3 years ago the second lien appeared, $94,600. The interest rate was predatory, the kind you only accept when you're desperate and out of options. Next I went hunting for the business deal my mother had mentioned. I searched for my father's LLC filings. George Sterling Consulting. The status was active, but the revenue reports were a joke. The company had been bleeding money for 5 years. There was no big deal closing next month. There were only mounting liabilities. But the real smoking gun wasn't in the business records. It was in the court filings. I searched my father's name in the county clerk's database, filtering for civil suits. And there it was. Case number 19. CV 9039. Peterson versus Sterling, filed 3 years ago, settled out of court. The plaintiff, a former business partner, had accused George Sterling of embezzling funds from a joint venture. The settlement amount was confidential, but the timeline matched the second mortgage perfectly. He hadn't bought a boat, he hadn't renovated the kitchen, he had bought his freedom. I sat back, the glow of the screens illuminating the dark room. It was worse than I thought. My parents weren't just irresponsible. They were criminals in hiding. They had paid off a fraud allegation with debt, and now they were about to transfer that debt to Charlotte to wipe their hands clean. If the partner came back for more, Or if the IRS audited them, they could claim insolvency. They would point to the house transfer and say, "Look, we have nothing. Our daughter has the asset." They were setting her up as the fall guy for a crime she didn't even know existed. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Charlotte. "Please just let it go. You're ruining everything." I stared at the message. She still thought this was about a party. She thought I was being petty, trying to steal her spotlight. She didn't Charlotte. I was the only thing standing between her and a felony investigation. I didn't reply. I printed the court docket. I printed the settlement agreement summary. I printed the foreclosure notice. I compiled everything into a single PDF file titled The Truth. This was the trap of their good intentions. My mother had probably convinced herself that hiding this was an act of love. She would say they did it to protect the family name, to keep Charlotte from worrying. It was cognitive dissonance weaponized. They believed that maintaining the image of wealth was more important than the reality of survival. They thought that if they just kept dancing, the music would never stop. But the music had already stopped. The band had packed up and gone home. And the only sound left was the scratching of a pen on a foreclosure deed. I closed my laptop. I had the evidence. I had the motive. Now I just needed the venue. The rehearsal dinner was held in the ballroom of the Grand Hotel downtown. A venue that cost more for one night than my parents had in their combined retirement accounts. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, and the centerpieces were towering arrangements of white orchids. It was beautiful, it was expensive. It was a lie. I arrived late, carrying nothing but a slim laptop bag. I had traded my bridesmaid dress for a sharp black suit. Tonight wasn't about blending in. It was about standing out. I scanned the room. My parents were at the head table holding court, basking in the admiration of their guests. Charlotte was next to them, looking nervous but radiant, holding Oliver's hand. Oliver looked bored, checking his watch, clearly ready for the night to be over. I walked over to Charlotte first. I had to try one last time, just once, for my own conscience. "Charlotte," I said, leaning down to whisper in her ear. "We need to talk now." Outside, she pulled away, her eyes flashing with annoyance. "Not now, Haley. Dad is about to give his speech. Don't make a scene." "This isn't a scene. It's an intervention. Please." "5 minutes, no," she hissed. "Sit down or leave." I looked at her. I saw the fear behind the defiance. She knew something was wrong. She had to feel the tension radiating off our parents, but she was too terrified to look at it directly. She was choosing the comfortable lie over the terrifying truth. And in that moment Charlotte, I couldn't save her quietly. The infection had spread too deep. The only way to save the patient was to cut it out in front of everyone. I nodded slowly. "Okay." I walked to the back of the room where the AV technician was monitoring the slideshow. I had called ahead using my maid of honor status to get access change of plans. I told him, handing him a flash drive. "We're going with the updated presentation. Dad's speech needs visual aids." He shrugged and plugged it in. George stood up, tapping a spoon against his champagne flute. The room quieted. He smiled, that charming practice smile that had fooled bankers, business partners, and his own children for decades. "Friends, family." He began, his voice thick with emotion. "Tonight is about legacy, about passing the torch. Lisa and I have built a life, a home, a name. And tomorrow we give the jewel of that legacy, our beloved lake house, to our daughter Charlotte. It is our gift, our blessing, our—" I hit the spacebar on my laptop. The screen behind him, which had been displaying a photo of Charlotte as a toddler, flickered. Then it changed. It wasn't a baby picture. It was a PDF notice of default and intent to foreclose. The text was blown up to 10 feet tall. Amount due $99 and $39,190 and $50. The room went deadly silent. George stopped mid-sentence, confused by the sudden hush. He turned around, the color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. I didn't stop. I hit the spacebar again. The next slide appeared. Settlement agreement. Peterson versus Sterling. The fraud allegations. The settlement amount, $93,600. The date, 3 years ago. I hit the spacebar again. The email from my mother to my father, dated 3 months ago. If we transfer the deed before the balloon payment hits, the liability shifts to her. We can claim we gifted it in good faith. Buys us time. I walked to the center of the room. I didn't need a microphone. The silence was loud enough. It's not a legacy, Dad. I said. My voice calm, steady, lethal. It's a liability dump. You aren't giving her a home. You're giving her your debt. You're giving her your fraud settlement. You're giving her a bankruptcy so you don't have to file one yourself. George tried to speak to bluster to deny this. This is a misunderstanding. Haley is jealous. She's lying. The documents aren't lying, I said, pointing to the screen. That's the county clerk's stamp. That's the bank's letterhead. That's your signature on the settlement. Admitting to embezzlement. I turned to Oliver. He was staring at the screen, reading the numbers. He was a tech heir. He knew how to read a balance sheet. He stood up slowly. Is this true? He asked George. His voice wasn't angry. It was cold, businesslike. Oliver's son. Please let me explain, George stammered, sweating. Now is it true? George looked at the screen. He looked at the room full of people staring at him with horror. He looked at me and he crumbled. He didn't say yes. He just looked down. Oliver turned to Charlotte. She was sobbing, looking between the screen and her fiancé. Terrified, did you know? He asked her. No, she wailed. I swear, Oliver. I didn't know. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the debt on the screen. I believe you, he said. But I can't marry into this. My family. We can't be attached to fraud. He took the engagement ring off her finger, not cruelly, but decisively placed it on the table and walked out. The room erupted. My mother was screaming at me. Charlotte was on the floor in her white dress, crying. My father was slumped in his chair, a broken man. I watched it all. It was a massacre. It was the surgery of truth. I had just cut off the limb to save the body. It was bloody, it was painful, and it was absolutely necessary. I packed up my laptop. My work here was done. The fallout was swift, brutal, and total. The wedding was canceled the next morning. Not postponed, canceled. Oliver's family, who had built their fortune on tech patents and impeccable due diligence, cut ties immediately. They threatened to sue my father for misrepresentation if he tried to contact them again. My parents' social circle, the one they had mortgaged their future to impress, evaporated overnight. The fraud settlement was no longer a secret. It was the headline of every whispered conversation at the country club they could no longer afford. Charlotte showed up at my apartment 3 days later. She looked like a ghost. Her perfect hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wasn't wearing makeup for the first time in her life. She didn't look like an influencer. She looked like a survivor of a natural disaster. They're selling the lake house, she said. Her voice hoarse. The bank is taking it. Dad is liquidating his retirement to pay off the rest of the settlement debt, so he doesn't go to jail for tax evasion. I nodded. I know. I saw the listing. She sat on my couch, pulling her knees to her chest. I hated you, when you put that slide up on the screen. I wanted you to die. I know. But then Oliver left and Dad didn't stop him. Dad just sat there and let him walk away because he knew he was caught. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed. He wasn't going to tell me, was he? He was going to let me sign the deed. The next morning he was going to let me ruin my life so he could keep his membership at the club. Yes, I said softly, he was. She started to cry, a quiet, broken sound that hurt more than the screaming match at the rehearsal dinner. This was the cage of favoritism. Finally breaking open, the golden child Arya Charlotte, she wasn't the prize. She was the currency. I went to my desk and pulled out a folder. It wasn't an indictment this time. It was a lifeline. I handed it to her. What is this? She asked, wiping her eyes. It's a budget, a real one, and a list of recruiters I know who play entry-level marketing roles based on skill, not connections. It's a plan. Charlotte, for independence. She took the folder. She looked at it like it was a foreign object, then looked at me. Why are you helping me? I treated you like garbage because you're my sister. I said. And because the only way to beat them is to survive them. You don't need a rich husband or a lake house to be okay. You just need to learn how to stand on your own 3 feet. 6 months later, I met Charlotte for coffee. She was working as a junior coordinator at a PR firm. The pay wasn't great and she lived in a studio apartment with 3 roommates, but she paid her own rent. She looked tired, but she looked real. Mom called me yesterday, she said, stirring her latte. They moved into a condo in Jersey. She complained for 19 minutes about the lack of closet space. I smiled. Did you offer to send money? Nope, she said, a small proud smile touching her lips. I told her to try the container store and then I hung up. We sat there in the busy cafe, the noise of the city around us. There was no fireworks display, no champagne, no applause, just three sisters drinking coffee, finally seeing each other clearly for the first time. I picked up the check not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I had walked through the fire to get here. I had been the villain, the prosecutor, and the executioner. But looking at my sister free from the debt that would have drowned her, I knew I would do it all again. I had burned down the fantasy to save the reality, and the reality was worth saving. If you've ever had to be the villain, to save someone you love, share this story and tell me in the comments, what's the hardest truth you've ever had to tell? Don't forget to follow for more stories about breaking free. My story ends here. If you feel that this story is meaningful and brings useful lessons, please like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Thanks for listening and see you in the next videos.